Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back to a period of epic scale and nomadic might, the Mongol Empire. Imagine, for a moment, the vast, undulating steppes stretching out before you, the wind whispering tales of horsemen and conquerors. The air is crisp, carrying the distant scent of wood smoke and something undeniably meaty. You're riding hard, perhaps a little saddle sore, but there's an undeniable buzz in the air, a sense of anticipation building with every hoofbeat, because you, my friend, are on your way to a Mongol feast. Not just any meal, mind you, but a true gathering of warriors, leaders, and possibly, if you're lucky, or perhaps unlucky, depending on your diplomatic skills, to Khan himself. This isn't your grandma's potluck. This is a survival game, disguised as a party. You probably won't survive this, but hey, at least you'll have a good story, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've received the summons, a terse but unambiguous message delivered by a swift rider. It might have been a simple verbal instruction, or perhaps a small rolled parchment tied with a leather thong, the official seal of a tribal leader, or even a distant general impressing upon you the gravity of the invitation. There's no RSVP card, no online calendar invite you can accept or decline with the polite regrets. When a Mongol chieftain, let alone a Khan, extends an invitation to a feast, it's less an invitation and more of a directive. You packed your essentials, mostly just yourself and perhaps a trusty blade, because what else do you really need? Out here, your horse is your life and your wits are your currency. This isn't a black tie event. Less black refers to the hardened dirt on your boots, and tie refers to the knot you use to secure your horse. One mainstream historical fact about these summonses is that they often served a dual purpose, not just a social gathering, but a critical assembly for military planning, political discussions, or even the administration of justice. These feasts were the mobile administrative hubs of a nomadic empire. The journey itself is an experience. You're not cruising down a paved highway. You're traversing vast, often featureless landscapes. The sun beats down, or perhaps a chilling wind whips across the plains, testing your resolve. You travel light, perhaps with a small retinue if you're a person of some standing, but never burdened by excess. Every mile covered is a testament to the Mongol way of life, constant movement, adaptability, and an intimate understanding of the land. You might pass other nomadic groups. There gares the circular felt tents you might call yurts dotting the horizon like scattered mushrooms. You nod, a silent acknowledgement of shared hardship and common ground, before pressing on. Historians still argue whether the precise routes for these journeys were always communicated in advance, or if guests simply followed general directions and relied on local knowledge. It's likely a mix of both, depending on the scale of the feast and the prominence of the invitee. It's certainly not like plugging an address into your GPS and hoping for the best. There are no roads, just tracks worn by millennia of hooves and feet. And you're acutely aware that getting lost isn't just an inconvenience. It could be a matter of life and death, especially if you ran out of provisions. Good thing you packed that extra piece of dried jerky, just in case, right? Or perhaps you didn't. Oops. As you draw closer, the faint aroma of wood smoke and roasting meat grows stronger, a primal scent that cuts through the clear steppe air. Soon, you begin to see them. The gares, not just one or two, but dozens, perhaps hundreds, scattered across the plain like enormous white mushrooms. This isn't a permanent city. It's a temporary gathering, a mobile metropolis assembled for a purpose. You notice the larger gears in the center, clearly belonging to the more prominent figures, while smaller ones fan out, indicating the camps of lesser chiefs and their retinues. The entire scene hums with a quiet energy. Horses are being tethered, supplies unloaded, fires stoked. You're approaching annoyance, a Mongol lord's encampment, or perhaps even the order of a powerful Khan, a mobile court that could pack up and move at a moment's notice. This fluid existence, where even grand feasts were portable, is a testament to the Mongols' unparalleled logistical prowess. As you ride into the outer perimeter, standing, there's a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The casual movement of herders gives way to more purposeful activity. You dismount, perhaps handing your reins to a waiting attendant, or simply tethering your horse alongside many others. There are no velvet ropes here, no red carpet. The ground is still the same tough steppe earth you've been riding on for days. But there are unwritten rules, an intricate dance of protocol that begins the moment you arrive. You'd observe others watching how they comport themselves, learning from their subtle cues. You don't just stride boldly into the main gear. That would be an insult. Instead, there's a specific approach, a waiting game, a Mongol feast. Particularly one hosted by a high-ranking individual was never a free-for-all. Upon arrival, you'd be greeted by an official, perhaps a bee scribe or a senior servant, would verify your identity and your purpose. This wasn't about scanning a QR code or checking a guest list on an iPad. It was about reputation, lineage, and the unspoken understanding of who you were and what you represented. You might be asked your name, your father's name, your tribe. This information wasn't for a casual conversation. It was for the meticulous recording that was surprisingly common in the Mongol Empire, even in their nomadic lifestyle. One quirky tidbit is that in some accounts, particularly for foreign dignitaries, a sort of smell test was conducted, not in the literal sense of bad breath, but to assess their intentions and general character through careful observation. It sounds a bit like an ancient version of airport security, thought the pat-down. Once your identity was established, you would be guided toward the feasting gear, which would undoubtedly be larger and more ornate than most. The entrance of a gear traditionally faces south, a practical alignment for catching the sun and sheltering from prevailing winds. As you approach, you'd pause, allowing your eyes to adjust to the dim interior. The air thick with the aroma of meat, fermented mare's milk. We'll get to that, don't worry, and the subtle scent of felt and leather. There's a proper way to enter. Usually, you'd duck slightly, showing respect, and avoid stepping on the threshold. To step on the threshold was considered deeply disrespectful, akin to defiling the host's home, and could even lead to serious repercussions. This isn't just about good manners, it's about respecting the very fabric of their nomadic existence. The ger is more than a tent. It's a sanctuary, a home, a symbol of their life. Inside, the sounds would wash over you. The murmur of conversation, the clinking of bowls, perhaps the distant strumming of a horsehead fiddle or mooring core. The light, filtered through the smoke hole at the top and the open doorway, casts long shadows. You'd feel the warmth of the central hearth, around which much of the activity revolved. Your guide would then indicate where you were to be seated. And this, my friend, is where the real funor potential awkwardness begins. Historians still argue whether the seating protocols were always rigidly applied, or if some flexibility was allowed based on the nature of the feast or the personalities involved. But one thing is for sure, you didn't just plop down wherever you pleased. That's a surefire way to end up on the wrong side of a very large, very well-armed host. So, you stand, you wait, and you observe. Your survival depends on it. Your guide gestures, and you note the direction he points, not directly opposite the entrance, the place of highest honor, but perhaps to the left, among other esteemed but not paramount guests. Subtle nod of acknowledgement you give is crucial. It signifies your understanding and acceptance of your place in this temporary yet rigid social order. Inside the gear, the air is thick with the aroma of roasted meat, the sweet sour temps of fermented milk, and the earthy scent of felt and wood smoke. It's a symphony for the senses, immediately signaling that you've arrived at a place of both sustenance and significance. The gear itself is a marvel of nomadic engineering. Your eyes scan the interior, taking in the central hearth, its smoke rising through the tonneau, the crown wheel that forms the apex of the roof. Sunlight streams down from here, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and highlighting the rich tapestries and furs that line the walls. This isn't just a tent. It's a portable palace designed for warmth in winter and ventilation in summer, a testament to the Mongols' mastery of their environment. One mainstream historical fact is that the gear's design, particularly the tonneau and uni, the roof poles, was incredibly efficient for packing, transporting, and re-erecting, quickly enabling their rapid movements across vast distances. As you are led to your designated spot, you observe the seating arrangements, which are far from random. The most honored guests, and of course, the host himself, would be seated at the hoimer, the back of the gur, directly opposite the entrance. This position, facing south, was considered sacred and the most auspicious. Lesser dignitaries would fan out to the left and right, with those of lower status closer to the door. It's a bit like a medieval dinner party, but instead of name cards, your status is written on your forehead for everyone to read. You try to remember that embarrassing thing you said to your horse this morning, hoping no one noticed. A quirky tidbit about this hierarchy is that even the direction you faced when eating or drinking could be significant, with facing east often considered more respectful during certain rituals. You settle onto a felt mat, or perhaps a low cushion, adjusting your posture to an easy, respectful position, perhaps cross-legged. The ground beneath you isn't flat. It's the steppe, subtly uneven, adding to the authentic experience. You make eye contact with those around you, offering a small, polite nod. Silence, or at least a subdued murmur, is usually the rule until the host begins the proceedings. This isn't a place for boisterous chatter before the main event. It's a time for quiet observation, for assessing the room, and for mentally preparing for the feast to come. Historians still argue whether the seating order was always strictly enforced based on a predetermined roster of rank, or if the host sometimes exercised discretion to elevate or demote individuals based on recent events or political needs. It's likely a fluid system, a delicate balance of tradition and pragmatism. It's much like trying to get everyone to agree on what movie to watch, but with potentially higher stakes than just a bad evening. Your keen observation skills are your best friend here. Notice who is sitting where, who greets whom, and the subtle power dynamics at play. The feast is not just about eating. It's a performance of social order, a reaffirmation of alliances, and sometimes a stage for quiet negotiations. And you, dear listener, are a participant in this ancient, silent drama. Don't worry, no pop quiz later, unless it's about how much Kumis you can drink. Now that you're settled, or at least strategically positioned, your senses are fully engaged. The central hearth, often a shallow pit lined with stones, emanates a welcome warmth, chasing away the chill that can quickly creep into the vastness of the steppe. The smoke, thin and bluish, drifts upwards, carrying with it the tantalizing promise of the feast to come. You notice the elaborate felt hangings, perhaps embroidered with traditional patterns, and the sturdy wooden frame of the gur, painstakingly assembled and surprisingly resilient. This isn't glamping, but it's certainly more comfortable than a bivouac in the open air, especially when the winds pick up before any solid food is served. A crucial libation makes its rounds, Kumis. This is the quintessential Mongol drink, a fermented mare's milk that is both a staple and a social lubricant. A server, perhaps a young man or woman, approaches with a large, often wooden bowl or a skin bag, offering you a drink. You accept with both hands, a sign of respect, and take a sip. The taste is ... distinctive. It's slightly sour, effervescent, and tangy, with a very low alcoholic content, usually around 2 to 3%. It's not like the beer you might be used to, and certainly not your morning latte. Think of it as a probiotic yogurt drink that's decided to have a little party. Kumis wasn't just a drink, it was a cornerstone of Mongol life. One mainstream historical fact is that Kumis provided essential nutrients, particularly vitamins and fats. In a diet that could often be meat-heavy and otherwise lacking in certain micronutrients, it was a source of hydration, energy, and even a mild narcotic effect that helped to relax the nerves and foster camaraderie. You might find yourself feeling a pleasant warmth spreading through your stomach, a gentle hum in your head. It's certainly a far cry from a triple espresso, but then, you're not trying to conquer the world in an office building, are you? The communal nature of drinking Kumis is also paramount. Bowls would be passed around, each person taking a sip, before offering it to the next. This shared ritual reinforced bonds and symbolized unity within the group. Refusing Kumis without a very good reason could be seen as an insult, so you learn to appreciate its unique qualities, or at least pretend to. A quirky tidbit is that some historical accounts suggest the Mongols believed Kumis had medicinal properties, curing everything from exhaustion to certain illnesses. Whether it was the probiotics or just the psychological effect of a shared ritual, who's to say? It certainly wasn't going to fix a broken bone, but it might make you forget about it for a bit. Historians still argue whether the production of Kumis involved specific Kumi strains of starter cultures passed down through generations, or if it was a more spontaneous fermentation process influenced by the environment and general brewing techniques. Regardless, the consistency and quality of Kumis would vary from ger to ger and from region to region. Some would be milder, others more potent, depending on the mare's milk, the length of fermentation, and the skill of the maker. You might even find yourself developing a preference, though perhaps not one you'd openly declare at the table. After all, you don't want to accidentally offend the Kumis brewer. They might be the Khan's favorite cousin. As the bowls continue to circulate, the conversation gradually picks up, a low murmur at first, then growing into a more robust hum. A sign that the feast and the good times are truly beginning to flow. And flowing, it is, quite literally, with the Kumis flowing and a gentle buzz settling over the ger. Your attention inevitably turns to the main event, the meat. And when we talk about meat at a Mongol feast, we're not talking about a modest chicken breast or a delicate slice of roast beef. Oh no, my friend. We're talking about meat in quantities that would make a modern-day butcher weep tears of joy and a vegan faint on the spot. This is the heart and soul of Mongol cuisine, and it's served with an almost brutal simplicity that belies its importance. The most common and prized meat would be mutton. Sheep were the lifeblood of the nomadic Mongols, providing not only food, but also wool for clothing and felt for gers. You might see an entire boiled sheep presented on a large platter, steaming in the center of the ger. This isn't carved in the kitchen, it's carved right there in front of everyone. A server, or even the host himself, might begin to expertly slice pieces, often starting with the more prized cuts, like the back or the fatty tail, offering them to the most honored guests first. This is where your earlier observation of seating arrangements pays off. Your place dictates what cut you might receive and when, but it wasn't just mutton. Depending on the season and the success of hunts, you might also find beef, goat, or even horse meat. Horse meat, in particular, was a delicacy, especially from younger, fatter animals. It was a sign of wealth and status to serve horse meat, given the Mongols' deep respect and reliance on their steeds. One mainstream historical fact is that the Mongols' diet was incredibly protein-heavy, which, combined with their active nomadic lifestyle, contributed to their formidable physical prowess and endurance. They were, quite literally, built on meat. The preparation was often straightforward. Boiling was common, as was roasting over an open fire or hot stones. Spices were minimal, perhaps just salt, allowing the natural flavor of the meat to shine through. You wouldn't find elaborate marinades or complex sauces. The purity of the meat was celebrated. You might even be offered a piece of meat still on the bone, requiring you to use your hands and teeth. Cutlery wasn't always a given, and a knife was often personal. Don't worry, no judgment here if you get a little messy. It's all part of the experience. A quirky tidbit that might surprise you is the occasional inclusion of offal. Organs like liver, heart, and lungs were not discarded, but considered nutritious and often consumed, sometimes as part of a stew or simply boiled alongside the muscle meat. It's a testament to a culture that wasted nothing, where every part of the animal was utilized for survival. Imagine trying to get your kids to eat that at home. Eat your liver, darling. It's good for conquering empires. Doesn't quite have the same ring as eat your broccoli. Historians still argue whether the frequency and scale of these grand meat feasts were truly sustainable across the vastness of the empire, or if they were reserved for very special occasions in the higher echelons of society. It's likely that while everyday meals for the average Mongol might have been more modest, these large-scale feasts were indeed significant events, requiring considerable logistical effort to gather and prepare the animals. It's a logistical puzzle, really, like trying to cater a massive outdoor music festival with only horse-drawn carts and no refrigeration. But somehow, they pulled it off, time and time again, all in the name of good food and empire building. So, take another bite, savor the rich, gamey flavor, and try not to think about your cholesterol. While meat might be the undisputed monarch of the Mongol feast, certainly wasn't the only dish to grace the communal table. Even in a diet so heavily reliant on animal products, there was a surprising, if sometimes subtle, variety that rounded out the meal. After the initial onslaught of boiled or roasted cuts, you might notice other dishes appearing, sometimes in smaller bowls or on shared platters. These additions often served to complement the rich meats, offering different textures and flavors, or providing a much-needed balance to the protein-heavy fare. One common accompaniment, often served alongside the meat, would be dairy products beyond just Kumis. You might find bowls of arrowroll, dried curds of milk, which are hard, tangy, and provide a lasting source of energy. They're a bit like very firm cheese curds that have decided to go on a diet and lose all their moisture. These could be gnawed on or sometimes rehydrated in water or Kumis. Then there's biaslag, a type of fresh, soft cheese, or grim, a thick, clotted cream skimmed from boiled milk. These weren't just treats. They were vital sources of fat and calories, particularly in the harsh steppe environment. One mainstream historical fact is that dairy products were as essential to the Mongol diet as meat, providing a complete nutritional profile for their nomadic lifestyle. They were, in essence, the original superfoods of the steppe. Vegetables, as you might imagine, were less prominent, but not entirely absent. Root vegetables like wild onions and garlic would have been foraged and might appear in stews or simply roasted. Wild greens, herbs, and berries gathered during the warmer months could also be incorporated, though likely not in large quantities. This wasn't a salad bar, after all. The emphasis was on sustenance and energy for a highly active life. Quirky tidbit, however, is that while fresh vegetables were scarce, some sources suggest that certain types of wild mushrooms or even specific edible roots were occasionally used, though they wouldn't have formed a major part of the diet. It's like finding a single, lonely carrot in a field of cattle. A pleasant surprise, but not a staple. Grain products were also rare, but not entirely unknown. If you were at a feast hosted by a Khan with access to settled agricultural regions, you might encounter small amounts of millet or barley, perhaps in a simple porridge or as part of a stew thickened with ground grains. These would have been considered luxury items, acquired through trade or tribute from conquered peoples. Historians still argue whether bread, as we understand it, was a common sight at Mongol feasts, or if it was almost exclusively reserved for areas bordering settled agricultural lands. It seems unlikely that leavened bread, requiring ovens and a more settled lifestyle, would be a regular feature in the heart of the nomadic empire beyond the main courses. You might also find simple broths or soups, often made from boiled meat and bone marrow, providing a warm, nourishing liquid that helped with digestion and rehydration. These were humble but essential, and, of course, the ever-present Kumis would continue to flow, sometimes accompanied by irak, another name for Kumis, or stronger spirits if the occasion called for it. The Mongol feast was a multi-course affair, not in the sense of delicate platings, but in the sheer volume and variety of animal-derived sustenance available. It was a feast designed for survival and strength, a culinary mirror of the empire's power, with your stomach warming with Kumis and satisfied with several cuts of mutton. The atmosphere in the ger begins to shift from quiet anticipation to lively conviviality. This is where the feast truly blossoms beyond mere sustenance and becomes a hub of social interaction, entertainment, and cultural expression. The Mongols, despite their fearsome reputation as warriors, cherished moments of leisure and celebration, and these feasts were prime opportunities for such revelry. Music would undoubtedly fill the air. The mournful, resonant tones of the Morin kor, the horsehead fiddle, might begin to play, its two strings capable of evoking the vastness of the steppe and the galloping of horses. Other instruments, perhaps a shadraga, a three-stringed lute, or a transverse flute, might join in, creating melodies that are at once deeply melancholic and stirringly evocative. The music isn't background noise. It's an integral part of the experience, often accompanied by throat singing, or kumi, where a single vocalist produces multiple pitches simultaneously, creating an almost otherworldly sound. One mainstream historical fact is that music, particularly the Morin kor, was central to Mongol identity and storytelling, often accompanying epic poems and historical narratives. Beyond music, storytelling and poetry were paramount. Bards, often revered members of society, would recite epic tales of heroes, battles, and the glorious deeds of past Khans. These weren't just bedtime stories, they were living histories, reinforcing cultural values, lineage, and the shared narrative of the Mongol people. You might hear tales of Genghis Khan's early struggles, or the legendary exploits of a mythical warrior, all delivered with dramatic flair and captivating rhythm. This oral tradition was how history and culture were passed down through generations. In a society that was largely non-literate in the early imperial period, physical prowess and skill were also celebrated, while not always directly within the feasting gear. Surrounding the encampment, you might find impromptu wrestling matches, BDH, archery contests, or horse racing demonstrations. These were not only forms of entertainment, but also vital training for warriors in ways to display individual and tribal strength. Imagine watching a wrestling match break out, the grunts and thuds adding a primal drumbeat to the feasting sounds, all under the approving gaze of the chieftains. It's like the ultimate combination of dinner and a show. But the show might involve someone getting body slammed. A quirky tidbit is that while drinking games were certainly a feature, they weren't always just about getting tipsy. Some sources suggest complex riddling contests or wordplay challenges accompanied the drinking, where missteps or incorrect answers might result in having to drink more kumis. So, It wasn't just about outdrinking your neighbor. It was about outthinking them too, adding an intellectual layer to the inebriation. It's a good way to test your wits before you've had too much of that fermented goodness. Historians still argue whether the level of formal organization for these entertainment segments was consistent across all feasts, right? Or if they were more spontaneous and dependent on the particular host's preferences and resources. It's likely a blend up, while impromptu displays of skill were common. Major feasts likely had designated entertainers and bards to ensure the flow of the festivities. The revelry would continue late into the night, fueled by more Kumis, more meat, and the camaraderie of shared stories and songs. You'd feel the rhythmic pulse of the drums, the soaring notes of the Marine Corps, and the booming laughter of warriors who, for a time, had set aside their swords for celebration. And you, dear listener, are right there in the thick of it, witness to the vibrant heart of the Mongol Empire. Amidst the joyous cacophony of music, laughter, and the clinking of bowls, a crucial element of Mongol culture would emerge: the art of storytelling. More than mere entertainment, these narratives were the lifeblood of their history, their law, and their collective identity. Imagine a respected elder or a designated bard, his voice resonating through the gyre, commanding the attention of even the most boisterous warriors. The background music might soften or even cease as the narrative takes center stage. These weren't just simple fables, They were often epic poems, long and intricate, recounting the deeds of Genghis Khan and his successors, the glorious battles fought, the wisdom of ancient Khans, and the origins of their tribes. The bards, often accompanied by the haunting melodies of the Marine Corps, possessed incredible memories, able to recite hundreds, if not thousands, of lines verbatim. This oral tradition was their library, their historical archive, and their moral compass, all rolled into one captivating performance. One mainstream historical fact is that the secret history of the Mongols, one of the earliest and most important historical accounts of the Mongol Empire, was originally an oral tradition before being transcribed. It highlights the profound significance of spoken narratives. You'd listen intently, perhaps picking up on subtle nuances, inside jokes, or references to historical events you might have heard snippets of during your journey. The rhythm of the words, the emphasis on certain phrases, and the dramatic pauses would draw you in. These stories served multiple purposes. They reinforced loyalty to the Khan, reminded everyone of their shared heritage and destiny, and instilled pride in their achievements. It was a potent form of social conditioning, but delivered as compelling drama. A quirky tidbit that often comes up in accounts is the use of heroic names or epithets, which were often grand and descriptive, adding to the mystique of the characters in the narratives. A warrior might not just be Batu, but Batu the Thunder-Footed, or Batu whose arrows never miss. These exaggerated titles added a mythical layer to even real historical figures, blurring the lines between fact and legend in a way that modern historians still try to untangle. It's like calling your friend Dave the destroyer of pizzas. After a particularly enthusiastic night, historians still argue whether the bards had free rein with their narratives, or if their stories were subject to some form of censorship or direction from the ruling elite to ensure they promoted the desired political messages. It's likely a mix. While creative license was probably allowed, tales that undermined authority or glorified dissent would certainly not be tolerated. These storytelling sessions were, in essence, highly effective propaganda, albeit delivered with artistic flair as the stories unfolded. You'd notice the expressions on the faces around you: reverence, amusement, a shared sense of belonging. The feast became more than just a meal. It transformed into a communal gathering, a sacred space where the past was relived. Heroes were honored, in the future of the empire was implicitly shaped through the power of narrative. It's a powerful reminder that long before books and screens, the human voice and a well-told tale were the most potent forms of connection and cultural transmission. And as the bard's voice faded, leaving the echoes of ancient heroes in the air, you'd feel a deeper connection to the formidable people you were among. As the stories wind down and the Kumis continues to flow, another, more tangible aspect of the Mongol feast often comes into play: the exchange of gifts and the subtle dance of diplomacy. These gatherings were rarely just about food and merriment. They were crucial arenas for political maneuvering, forging alliances, and demonstrating status. Your keen observation skills, honed by your experiences navigating the seating hierarchy and the flow of conversation, are more vital than ever here. The giving of gifts was a highly ritualized and significant part of Mongol diplomacy. The Khan, or host, would often initiate this, bestowing gifts upon favored guests or those whose loyalty he wished to secure or acknowledge. These could range from fine silks and brocades acquired through trade with China or Persia to valuable furs, weapons, or even horses. Receiving a gift from the Khan was not merely a token, it was a mark of honor, a public declaration of your standing in his eyes. It's an intangible sign of the relationship between you and the imperial power. One mainstream historical fact is that the exchange of gifts was a fundamental aspect of diplomacy across many ancient and medieval empires. For the Mongols, it was particularly important in maintaining loyalty and integrating diverse peoples into their vast realm. Of course, the expectation was that you, as a guest, would also reciprocate. The value and nature of your gift would subtly, or not so subtly, reflect your own status and your relationship with the host. You wouldn't present a rusted butter knife to a Khan unless you wanted to quickly find yourself demoted to human pincushion. Your gift might be a fine piece of craftsmanship from your own region, a particularly strong horse, or a valuable piece of jewelry. The act of giving was as important as the gift itself, performed with respect and presented in a manner that acknowledged the recipient's status. It was like a very high-stakes game of Secret Santa, where the wrong present could lead to a less than festive outcome beyond the formal exchange. The feast provided an invaluable opportunity for informal diplomacy and negotiation. Away from the rigid formality of an audience in the order, disputes could be aired, alliances quietly discussed, and strategies for future campaigns whispered over bowls of Kumis. You might notice chieftains huddling together, their voices lowered, or a foreign envoy engaging in intense, yet polite, conversation with a Mongol general. This wasn't just small talk. It was the quiet machinery of empire grinding away even amidst the revelry. A quirky tidbit is that in some accounts, particularly concerning interactions with foreign envoys, gifts of live animals, especially rare or exotic ones, were highly prized. Imagine trying to transport a giraffe across the steppe just to impress the Khan. That's commitment, or perhaps just a very confused giraffe. Historians still argue whether the gifts exchanged at these feasts were primarily symbolic gestures of goodwill, or if they often involved more practical considerations, such as military intelligence, agreements on tribute, or the allocation of grazing lands. It's likely a blend, with the symbolic gestures often paving the way for more substantive discussions once the initial pleasantries and shared Kumis had set a relaxed tone. As the evening progresses, and perhaps the Kumis takes more of an effect, the atmosphere might become even more relaxed, allowing for deeper, more personal connections to form. These feasts were not just about showing off wealth and power, but about building and reinforcing the personal bonds that held the vast Mongol Empire together. So, as you accept a finely crafted silver bowl or present your own carefully chosen offering, you're not just participating in a social custom, you're playing a vital role in the intricate web of imperial politics. As the Grand Mongol Feast slowly winds down, the flickering light of the hearth illuminating a few lingering guests. Your mind might turn to a less glamorous but equally fascinating aspect of these massive gatherings, the aftermath of abundance. What happens when hundreds or even thousands of people have feasted on entire animals, drunk copious amounts of kumis, and celebrated with gusto for days on end? The logistical challenges of a nomadic empire didn't end with setting up the gears and preparing the food. It's extended to the necessary, if unglamorous, task of cleaning up and moving on. Imagine the sheer volume of bones, hides, and discarded scraps of food. In a modern setting, we'd be talking about industrial-sized waste bins and complex recycling programs. As for the Mongols, it was a matter of practical disposal and efficient utilization. Bones, particularly large ones, might be cleaned and used as tools or simply left for scavengers to clean the steppe. Hides, of course, were far too valuable to be discarded. They would be processed for leather, felt, or other materials essential for their nomadic life. Nothing was truly wasted if it could be repurposed. One mainstream historical fact is that the Mongols were incredibly efficient in their use of resources, a necessity born of their nomadic lifestyle where every item had to be transportable and useful. Their approach to waste was fundamentally different from sedentary societies. The ground around the feasting gear, once pristine steppe, would now bear the marks of hundreds of feet, hoofprints, and the remnants of fires, while the Mongols were masters of striking camp and leaving little trace. These grand feasts would inevitably leave a more significant impact. The sheer scale of the event meant a considerable amount of organic matter left behind. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Kit would decompose and return to the earth, fertilizing the very ground that sustained their herds. It was a natural, cyclical process, albeit on a massive scale. Consider also the vessels used, the wooden bowls, the leather kumis bags, the large cooking pots. These would all need to be cleaned, packed, and made ready for the next move. There was no running water or dishwashers, just manual labor, often by designated servants or younger members of the encampment. It's like catering a massive outdoor wedding, but then having to pack up the entire venue on horseback. A quirky tidbit is that some accounts suggest a deliberate practice of scattering certain organic waste to encourage the return of wild game, effectively creating a natural larder for future hunts in the area. It was a rudimentary form of ecological management, whether intentional or simply a happy coincidence. Historians still argue whether designated cleanup crews were a formal part of the Mongol military or social structure, RP, if the responsibility fell more informally to the members of each household attending the feast. It's likely a combination. While individual families would tidy their own immediate areas, larger-scale waste management would have required a more coordinated effort, perhaps overseen by a quartermaster or a designated official. As the sun begins to rise, casting long shadows across the quieted encampment, the process of dismantling the temporary city would begin. Gears would be methodically taken down, their frames and felt coverings loaded onto carts or pack animals. The cooking fires would be extinguished, the last embers dying down. It's a great feast, a whirlwind of food, drink, and celebration would leave behind only a flattened patch of grass, a few scattered bones, and the lingering scent of smoke and memory, ready for the wind to sweep the last traces away. It's a powerful testament to their transient empire. It's leaving behind minimal physical imprint, yet creating an indelible mark on history. While the grand, stationary feasts we've discussed offer a vivid snapshot of Mongol hospitality, it's crucial to remember that the empire was, at its heart, a military machine constantly in motion. This begs a fascinating question. How did these elaborate feasts, with their mountains of meat and flowing kumis, translate to life on the move, particularly during military campaigns? The answer reveals even more about the Mongols. unparalleled logistical genius and their adaptability. Imagine you are part of a Mongol army, marching across vast territories, sometimes for months on end. The primary goal is conquest, swift and decisive. Yet, even in the harshest conditions, the Mongols understood the importance of morale, rest, and strategic gatherings. This is where the concept of the mobile feast comes into play. These weren't the sprawling, days-long affairs you'd experience at a royal order, but rather condensed, highly efficient versions designed to serve specific purposes. The most critical factor was logistics. While on campaign, the army would carry its own provisions, often live herds of sheep, goats, and horses that served as a moving larder. This meant fresh meat was always available, a significant advantage over armies that relied on cumbersome supply lines of preserved food. When a feast was called for, perhaps after a significant victory, to celebrate a promotion, or to solidify a new alliance, animals would be slaughtered on the spot. One mainstream historical fact is that the Mongol army's self-sufficiency in terms of food, carrying their own livestock, was a revolutionary military innovation that allowed them to conduct rapid, long-distance campaigns with unprecedented speed and independence. The preparation would be simpler, faster, roasting over open fires, or preparing cork hog meat cooked with hot stones inside a sealed container would be common methods, allowing large quantities to be cooked relatively quickly. Kumis would still be consumed, though perhaps in smaller quantities and from more portable vessels. The gears used would be standard soldier gears, perhaps assembled more quickly than the grander versions, or even just large felt tents erected for the occasion. The emphasis was on utility and efficiency, not elaborate decor. These mobile feasts served vital functions beyond mere sustenance. They were moments for generals to gather their officers, discuss battle plans, and issue new orders. They were opportunities to distribute spoils of war, ensuring fairness and preventing internal strife. For the common soldier, a mobile feast was a welcome respite from the arduous march, a chance to reconnect with comrades, share stories of valor, and reaffirm their loyalty to their commanders. This was a strategic tool for maintaining cohesion and discipline in a vast and diverse fighting force. A quirky tidbit is that in some desperate situations, or during prolonged sieges, the Mongols were known to sustain themselves by drinking blood from a vein in their horses' necks without harming the animal. While not a feast in the traditional sense, it highlights their extreme adaptability and resourcefulness when conventional food sources were limited. It's certainly a more intense version of a protein shake. Historians still argue whether the frequency of these mobile feasts was primarily dictated by tactical necessity, such as after a major victory, or if commanders tried to schedule them at regular intervals to maintain troop morale, even in less celebratory circumstances. It was likely a pragmatic balance, adapting to the ever-changing demands of conquest. So, even as you trudge through mud or dust, the promise of a shared meal, a moment of camaraderie, and the subtle exchange of information would fuel you forward. Testament to the Mongols' ability to integrate celebration and survival. As the Mongol Empire expanded, absorbing diverse peoples and cultures into its vast dominion, so too did its feasting traditions begin to evolve. These gatherings became fascinating crucibles of cultural exchange via food, reflecting the empire's unparalleled ability to integrate and adapt. You'd notice subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, influences from the conquered lands appearing on the feasting table, adding new layers of flavor and complexity to the traditional Mongol fare. Consider the influence of China, for instance, as the Mongols established their rule over vast swaths of China. New ingredients and culinary techniques would undoubtedly have found their way into the imperial diet. You might encounter rice, steamed or boiled, perhaps even in a more elaborate form than the humble millet that might have been occasionally seen before. Spices like ginger, star anise, and various peppers, previously rare or unknown, would start to infuse the meat dishes, offering a departure from the simple salt seasoning. Noodles, a Chinese staple, could also make an appearance, particularly at feasts held in settled areas or those catering to Chinese officials. One mainstream historical fact is that the Yuan dynasty, the Mongol-led dynasty in China, saw a significant cultural exchange, including culinary influences, with the Mongols adopting many Chinese administrative and cultural practices. Then there's the impact of Persian and Central Asian cuisines. As the Mongol Golden Horde swept westwards, they encountered sophisticated culinary traditions rich in various grains, dried fruits, nuts, and complex spice blends. Dishes like pilafs, rice cooked in broth with meat and vegetables, or kebabs, grilled skewers of marinated meat, could have been introduced. The use of yogurt, beyond just fermented mare's milk, and various sweet pastries made with honey and nuts would also offer a delightful contrast to the more austere Mongol diet. Imagine the delightful shock of biting into something sweet after days of just meat and kumis. This cultural fusion wasn't just about new ingredients, it was about new ways of presenting and consuming food. While the core of the feast remained meat and kumis, the periphery would slowly expand. More refined serving dishes, perhaps even porcelain from China, might replace simple wooden bowls for certain items. The introduction of different forms of alcohol, such as grape wine from Persia or even Chinese rice wine, would supplement or even sometimes replace kumis for certain guests, particularly foreign dignitaries unaccustomed to fermented mare's milk. A quirky tidbit is that accounts from travelers like Marco Polo often highlight the sheer opulence of the Great Khan's banquets, describing hundreds of dishes and a dazzling array of drinks, many of which would have been foreign to traditional Mongol fare. It showcases how, at the very pinnacle of the empire, Kana, the feasts became a showcase of global conquest and wealth, a culinary microcosm of their dominion. It's like a medieval World Expo, but with more mutton and less queuing. Historians still argue whether these foreign culinary influences fundamentally altered the core Mongol feasting tradition, or if they were merely superficial additions, primarily enjoyed by the elite and those in settled regions. It's likely that while the nomadic Mongols of the steppe largely retained their traditional diet, the imperial court and major administrative centers showcased a far greater fusion, reflecting the diverse peoples under their rule. The feast, therefore, became not just a symbol of Mongol power, but also a living testament to the vast network of cultures they had brought under their formidable umbrella. One delicious bite at a time, having explored the gastronomic journey of a Mongol feast. From the arrival to the diverse dishes and the cultural exchanges, let's now consider its enduring impact. The legacy of the Mongol table extends far beyond mere culinary habits. It touches upon military strategy, cultural exchange, and even the very fabric of governance. These feasts weren't just about filling bellies. They were powerful tools that shaped an empire and left an indelible mark on history. Firstly, logistical innovations demonstrated in their feasting, particularly on campaigns, revolutionized military supply chains. The concept of a self-sufficient army feeding itself from its own herds and relying on swift, mobile slaughter and preparation was a game changer. This approach allowed the Mongols to move faster and sustain longer campaigns than any army before them, effectively extending their reach across continents. One mainstream historical fact is that the Mongol military's ability to live off the land and its own mobile food sources significantly contributed to their unprecedented speed and success in conquest, making traditional siege warfare and supply line disruptions less effective against them. It was the ultimate grab-and-go meal plan, but for an entire army beyond the battlefield. The feasts served as crucial instruments of governance and diplomacy. We've seen they were arenas for formal gift giving, informal negotiations, and the reaffirmation of loyalty. The Khan's table was where alliances were forged, disputes were settled, and the vast, disparate tribes and conquered peoples were brought together under a shared experience. The communal consumption of kumis and meat fostered a sense of unity and shared identity, even among diverse groups. It was a powerful, visceral way to bind an empire together. More effective than countless decrees written on parchment. The cultural exchange facilitated by these feasts also left a lasting imprint, while the nomadic Mongols maintained their core culinary traditions, the exposure to Chinese spices, Persian cooking methods, and Central Asian grains introduced new flavors and techniques that undoubtedly spread across the Eurasian landmass. The Silk Road wasn't just a conduit for goods. It was a pathway for recipes, ingredients, and dining customs. Imagine the subtle changes that occurred as a Mongol warrior, having tasted a pilaf in Persia, returned to the steppe with new ideas for adding flair to his mutton. Historians still argue whether the culinary influences primarily flowed into the Mongol diet, or if Mongol methods of meat preparation, such as budog goat cooked in its own skin or korkog, also significantly spread to other cultures. It's likely a reciprocal process, enriching the cuisines of many lands. A quirky tidbit is that the Mongols' preference for boiling meat, which preserved its moisture and made it easy to transport and consume, is said to have indirectly influenced some forms of hot pot cuisine that later became popular in China, particularly in northern regions. So, in a way, your favorite hot pot might owe a tiny nod to a Mongol warrior's desire for a warm, hearty meal on the go. Ultimately, the Mongol feast was more than just a meal. It was a microcosm of their empire, adaptive, resourceful, deeply traditional, yet open to new influences, and profoundly strategic. It embodied their relationship with the land, their social hierarchy, their military might, and their capacity for both brutal conquest and sophisticated cultural integration. As you reflect on the sheer scale and ingenuity of these gatherings, you realize that the legacy of the Mongol table wasn't just about what they ate, but how they ate it and what that consumption allowed them to achieve. It's a powerful reminder that even the simplest act of breaking bread, or in this case, mutton, can have world-changing consequences. We've journeyed through the sights, sounds, and tastes of a Mongol feast, from the initial invitation to the diverse dishes and cultural exchanges. Now, as the embers of our imaginary hearth begin to fade, let's allow our minds to drift, letting the final images of this remarkable historical period settle softly around us. The grand gares, once bustling with life, slowly become indistinct shapes against the vast, dark steppe. The laughter and the music, once so vibrant, now merely echoes on the wind. Like a half-remembered dream, the scent of wood smoke and roasted meat, so potent during the height of the feast, gradually dissipates, replaced by the crisp, cool air of the night. You feel the gentle hum of the earth beneath you, a constant presence that reminds you of the deep connection the Mongols had with their environment. Their feasts were not merely social events. They were a profound expression of their symbiotic relationship with the land, the animals, and the elements. Every bite of mutton, every sip of kumis, was a testament to their ability to thrive in a world that might seem harsh and unforgiving to modern sensibilities. Recall the communal spirit, the shared bowls of kumis, the passing of meat from hand to hand. This wasn't just about sharing food, it was about sharing life, forging bonds of kinship and loyalty that stretched across vast distances and diverse tribes in a world without widespread communication networks. These feasts were the essential threads that wove the fabric of their empire together. There were moments of unity, of reaffirmation, where differences could be set aside, even if only for a night, in favor of shared humanity and a common purpose. Think too of the sounds, the deep, resonant notes of the Morin core, the captivating rhythm of the bards' epic tales. These were the voices of a people carrying their history, their myths, and their values across generations. In the quiet after the feast, you might almost hear those ancient melodies still lingering, a testament to the enduring power of oral tradition and the human need to tell stories. Historians still debate the extent to which these oral histories were embellished over time, but their fundamental role in preserving cultural memory is undeniable. The flickering light of the central hearth, which had been the pulsating heart of the gur, now casts long dancing shadows, shrinking the grand space into something more intimate and peaceful. You remember the warmth it provided, the sense of security in the vast, open wilderness. It was more than just a source of heat. It was a symbol of home, of gathering, of life itself. The smoke rising through the tunnel and disappearing into the endless sky seemed to carry with it the very essence of the Mongol spirit, boundless, free, and deeply connected to the natural world. And as your own eyelids grow heavy and the final whispers of the steppe breeze lull you toward slumber, you realize that the Mongol feast was not merely a historical event to be studied. It was an experience to be felt, a vibrant, multi-sensory journey into the heart of a truly extraordinary civilization. Now, as the final echoes of the feast truly fade and the cool breath of the steppe night envelops our imaginary gear, let your mind gently release the vivid details we've explored. The aromas of roasted meat and tangy kumis soften into a faint, comforting memory, like the lingering scent of a campfire on your clothes. The boisterous laughter and the soaring notes of the marine core have quieted, replaced by the soft whisper of the wind outside the felt walls, a gentle lullaby from the vast, open land. You feel the slight give of the felt mat beneath you, a subtle connection to the earth that has sustained this nomadic empire for centuries. The flickering shadows from the central hearth have grown long and indistinct, blurring the edges of the gair, making it feel less like a temporary structure and more like a cozy, timeless cocoon. The warmth from the embers, once so robust, is now a gentle heat, just enough to keep the chill at bay. A subtle reminder of the life that pulsed here moments ago. Let your thoughts drift, cupped, unburdened by specific facts or figures, simply absorbing the atmosphere. Imagine the quiet contentment that settles over the encampment, a deep peace that follows a day of feasting, storytelling, and camaraderie. The horses outside might shift softly, their gentle snorts the only sound breaking the profound stillness of the night. This quiet moment after the grand spectacle is where the true essence of the Mongol world can be felt, a deep connection to nature, a resilience born of necessity, and a profound sense of community. The vastness of the steppe stretches out endlessly under a canopy of countless stars, a sight that must have been a constant source of wonder and humility for the Mongols. You are just a tiny part of this immense tapestry, a fleeting visitor to a world shaped by horsemen and felt tents. The empire they built, with all its complexities and contradictions, was sustained not just by conquest, but by these moments of shared sustenance, shared stories, and shared silence under the boundless sky. Allow yourself to feel the gentle pull towards slumber, your mind unwinding like a loosely coiled rope. The images of the feast, the faces, the flavors, all begin to merge, becoming part of the dreamscape. There's no need to hold on to them tightly, okay? They are now part of your own personal journey through history. Just as the Mongols packed their gears and moved on, so too can you let these experiences gently recede, leaving behind a faint, pleasant afterglow. The world of the Mongol feast was vibrant, vital, and ultimately deeply human. Now, dim the last light in your mind. Let your body relax completely and surrender to the quiet comfort of the night. Sleep calls, a gentle whisper promising rest and sweet dreams.